morning sun hung low over the Kuwaiti desert, turning the smoke-filled sky the color of old blood. February 26, 1991. The ground war had been raging for 3 days, and 19-year-old Navy hospital corpsman Karina Vaughn was learning what it meant to run toward gunfire when every instinct screamed to run away. She pressed her back against the shattered remains of what had once been a market stall, her hands slick with blood that wasn't hers. The Marine next to her couldn't have been more than 20 had taken shrapnel to the femoral artery. She'd already gone through 2 pressure bandages. The bleeding wasn't stopping. "Stay with me," she told him, her voice steadier than her hands. "You're going home, I promise." The radio on her hip crackled. A SEAL team 3 blocks north had taken casualties during a building clearance. Heavy contact, multiple wounded. Medevac was 20 minutes out. 20 minutes might as well have been forever. Karina looked at the Marine. His eyes were starting to glaze. She had maybe 5 minutes before he bled out completely. The SEAL team had maybe less. She made her choice. "Corporal Jensen," she shouted to the riflemen covering their position. "You keep pressure on this wound. Don't let up for anything. Understand?" Jensen's face went pale. "Doc, I'm not." "You are now." She grabbed his hand, placed it on the bandage. "Pressure. Don't stop. I'll be back." She didn't wait for his response. She was already running. The 3 blocks to the SEAL position felt like 3 miles. Bullets snapped past her head, that distinctive crack that meant someone was aiming at her specifically, not just spraying fire in her general direction. She'd learned to tell the difference her second day in country. She found the SEAL team pinned down in a collapsed building. 5 operators, 2 wounded. One of them, a lieutenant commander with bars that still held their shine, despite the dust and blood, was trying to apply a tourniquet to his own leg, with hands that shook so badly he couldn't get the windlass to turn. Karina didn't announce herself. She just moved, slid in next to him, took the tourniquet from his shaking hands and cranked it tight enough to make him scream. Good. Screaming meant blood pressure. Blood pressure meant alive. "Who's in charge?" she demanded. The wounded officer tried to speak through gritted teeth. "I am, Lieutenant Commander Stockton." "Not anymore." Karina was already moving to the second casualty, sucking chest wound. She could hear the air whistling through the hole with each breath. She had maybe 2 minutes before his lung collapsed completely. She worked fast. Vented chest seal. IV line. Morphine just enough to take the edge off without compromising his breathing. Her hands moved with a precision that seemed impossible given the chaos around her. The bullets still pinging off the rubble, the screams of wounded men in the distance. Stockton was staring at her. "You're a woman." Karina didn't look up from her work. "Outstanding observation, sir. You want a medal or you want to get your men out of here?" One of the other SEALs, a chief petty officer with a beard full of dust, actually laughed. "I like her. Can we keep her?" "Medevac's inbound," Karina said. 2 minutes, but we need to move to the extraction point. These walls won't hold much longer." They made it to the extraction point. All of them. The Marine she'd left with Corporal Jensen made it too. 3 months later, Karina Vaughn received the Navy Cross for actions above and beyond the call of duty. The citation mentioned her extraordinary heroism and complete disregard for her own safety while engaged with enemy forces. What it didn't mention was the Iraqi soldier she'd killed on her way to that SEAL team. The young man couldn't have been older than 18 who'd stepped out of a doorway with an AK-47. She'd put 2 rounds center mass before she even registered what she was doing. He looked surprised as he fell. She still saw his face sometimes, usually at 3 in the morning when the darkness made everything feel closer than it should. But that was 29 years ago. That was a different war, a different world. The world moved on. Karina Vaughn moved with it. The unmarked sedan rolled through the main gate of Naval Base Coronado just after dawn on December 14, 2020. The Marine on duty checked the credentials without much interest, waved the vehicle through, and returned to his post. He had no way of knowing that the woman in the back seat was about to change everything about SEAL Team 7. Captain Karina Vaughn watched the base wake up through tinted windows. She'd specifically requested this arrival time. No ceremony, no honor guard, no press of officers waiting to curry favor with the new commanding officer. Just a quiet entrance that would let her see what she was inheriting before anyone knew to put on a show. At 48, Karina had spent 29 years in service. 29 years of blood, sweat, and decisions that still kept her awake at night. 29 years of proving herself in a world that had never been designed for women like her. The sedan stopped near the administrative buildings, far from the training areas. Karina stepped out wearing faded jeans, a plain white t-shirt, and running shoes that had seen better days. Dark sunglasses hid her sharp gray eyes. To anyone watching, she looked like a contractor's wife visiting the base. Maybe someone's sister in town for the holidays. Exactly as she'd planned. She slung a small backpack over one shoulder and started walking. The driver had offered to wait, but she'd declined. She needed to be alone for this. Needed to feel the base, understand its rhythms, see how her new command operated when they thought no one important was watching. The December air carried the salt smell of the Pacific. Gulls wheeled overhead, their cries mixing with the distant sound of a drill sergeant's voice. Karina let her feet carry her toward the training grounds drawn by muscle memory and instinct, honed over 3 decades. Her phone buzzed. A text from Admiral Harlan Stockton, the same SEAL she'd treated in Kuwait all those years ago, now a 3-star with enough clout to make or break careers. Ready for tomorrow's ceremony? Tomorrow, the official change of command. The moment when she would stand before SEAL Team 7 in dress whites and accept responsibility for 147 of the most elite warriors in the world. The youngest female commanding officer in naval special warfare history. She didn't respond to the text. Stockton would understand. He'd been the one to approve her unorthodox arrival after all. Karina's mind drifted as she walked, not back to Kuwait this time, but to a small office in Virginia Beach. 6 years ago, a manila folder on her desk labeled Corporal Jameson Dalton, Kia, Syria, 2019. She'd trained Jamie in 2013 at Little Creek. 22 years old, Tennessee accent, thick as molasses grin that could light up a room. He called her Captain V because he could never quite get comfortable with the formality of her rank. She'd let him get away with it because he reminded her of her younger brother, the one who died in a car accident when she was in high school. Jamie had been sharp, instinctive, the kind of operator who could read a situation 3 moves ahead. She'd pushed him harder than anyone else in that training cycle because she'd seen something special in him, something worth forging into something extraordinary. In 2019, Lieutenant Commander Douglas Sloan had frozen during an ambush in northern Syria. 3 seconds of hesitation, that was all it took. Jamie Dalton had moved to cover his CO's position, and an ISIS sniper had put a round through his neck. He'd bled out before anyone could reach him. Karina had read the after-action report 17 times. She could recite it from memory. Every tactical decision, every communication breakdown, every moment where a different choice might have saved Jamie's life. She read it again every year on March 15th, Jamie's birthday, her own private penance for not being there when it mattered most. The training grounds came into view. Even from this distance, Karina could hear the distinctive cadence of military instruction, the sharp bark of orders, the rhythmic sound of boots hitting pavement, the metallic click of weapons being assembled and disassembled. A group of recruits was gathered around a senior enlisted man. Even from 200 yards, Karina could read the body language. Confidence, experience, authority earned through blood and time. She moved closer, staying to the edge of the training area, observing. And then she saw him. Sergeant First Class Barrett Stone, 34 years old. 8 years with SEAL Team 7. The file said he'd been passed over for Master Chief 3 times too rigid in his training methodology, resistant to change, unable to adapt his leadership style to modern operational requirements. The file didn't say what Karina saw in those first 30 seconds. Barrett Stone looked exactly like Jameson Dalton. Not identical. Barrett was taller, broader through the shoulders. His hair was lighter, his jaw more pronounced. But the way he moved, the precise, economical gestures of a man who'd spent years training others, the way he carried himself, the intensity in his eyes as he corrected a recruit's grip on an M4 carbine. Jamie had moved like that, had that same focus, that same conviction that training wasn't just repetition, but the difference between operators coming home alive or in body bags. Karina felt something twist in her chest. Not quite grief, not quite hope. Something in between that she didn't have a name for. She watched Barrett drill the recruits for another 10 minutes. He was good, better than good. He caught mistakes before they became habits-corrected technique with patient precision and somehow managed to maintain discipline without breaking spirits. The recruits respected him. She could see it in how they responded to his instructions, how they pushed themselves harder when he was watching. This was a man who gave a damn, who understood that training wasn't about breaking people down, it was about building them up into something stronger than they'd ever imagined they could be. This was exactly the kind of NCO she needed. Karina started walking toward the training area. Barrett Stone had been drilling the same basic movements for an hour, but his patience hadn't wavered. At 34, he'd spent the last 8 years with SEAL Team 7, and before that, 6 years proving himself worthy of the trident he wore with such pride. He was tall, just over 6 feet, with the kind of build that came from functional strength rather than gym vanity. His uniform was immaculate boots polished to a mirror shine, despite the dust of the training ground. The 15 recruits in front of him represented the future of naval special warfare, and he took that responsibility with deadly seriousness. Again, he said, his voice carrying the weight of earned authority. Combat reload, smooth as fast, fast as smooth. The recruits moved through the drill. Barrett watched each one, noting who had natural aptitude and who was still fighting their own nervous system. Seaman Tucker Brennan fumbled the magazine change. Barrett was on him immediately, not harsh but firm, correcting the grip, the angle, the motion. Your weapon is an extension of your body, Brennan. You don't think about moving your arm. You don't think about this either. Barrett had learned to train from the best. He'd also learned the cost of poor training from the worst. His mind went where it always did when he thought about training. Syria 2019. Just over a year ago, but it might as well have been yesterday. Corporal Jameson Dalton had been his swim buddy, his brother in every way that mattered. They'd served together for 3 years, survived 2 deployments, trusted each other with their lives. And then they'd gotten Lieutenant Commander Douglas Sloan. Sloan had been promoted too fast, given authority, before he'd earned the wisdom to wield it. The mission brief had been sloppy, the intelligence questionable. But orders were orders, and they'd gone anyway. Jamie had died because Sloan froze when the situation turned bad. A simple decision, the kind you made 100 times in combat, and the man had just locked up. By the time someone else took control, it was too late. Barrett had carried Jamie's body out of that compound, had stood watch at Arlington National Cemetery while they played taps, had made a promise to himself that he would never let poor leadership cost another operator their life. Since then, he'd been protective of his training ground to the point of obsession. Some people thought he was too inflexible, too by the book. 3 times he'd been passed over for promotion to Master Chief, and 3 times the reason had been some variation of needs to be more adaptable in his approach. Barrett didn't care. He knew what adaptable got you. It got you dead friends and folded flags. He was demonstrating proper room entry techniques when he noticed movement at the edge of the training area. A figure approaching from the direction of the administrative buildings. Civilian clothes, female, walking with confidence but clearly heading toward a restricted zone. Barrett's jaw tightened. Civilians wandered into training areas more often than they should. Usually family members who didn't understand base protocols or contractors who'd taken a wrong turn. Either way, they needed to be redirected immediately. Training with live weapons didn't mix with unauthorized personnel. Continue the drill, he told the recruits, then turned toward the approaching woman. Ma'am, he called out, his voice firm but professional. You need to leave this area immediately. This is a restricted training zone. The woman kept walking, not ignoring him exactly, but not stopping either. She was maybe 50 yards away now, close enough that Barrett could see she wore sunglasses and had her hair pulled back in a casual ponytail. Barrett felt his irritation tick upward. Ma'am, he called again, louder this time. I said you need to leave this area. This is military property, and you're interfering with training operations. Behind him, several of the recruits had stopped their drill to watch. Barrett was aware of their eyes on him, aware that how he handled this would send a message. Eyes on your weapon, Brennan, Barrett snapped without turning around. This doesn't concern you. The woman finally stopped walking. She was 30 yards away now, close enough that Barrett could see she was probably in her late 40s. She carried herself with unusual confidence for a civilian. Something about her posture suggested she was comfortable in her own skin, unintimidated by the setting or his tone. I'm just observing, she said, her voice calm and level. I won't interfere with your training. Barrett felt a flash of anger. This wasn't a negotiation. This was a restricted military training area, and he had 15 young men learning skills that could mean the difference between life and death. He didn't have time for civilians who thought military bases were tourist attractions. "Listen, ma'am," he said, taking several steps toward her. "I don't know who you think you are, but this isn't a place for spectators. Military training exercises are serious business. You need to turn around and walk back the way you came." The recruits had stopped their drill entirely now. All 15 pairs of eyes were locked on the unfolding confrontation. Barrett was peripherally aware of this, and it only added to his frustration. Every second spent dealing with this woman was a second stolen from training that could save lives downrange. The woman didn't move. She stood there, hands relaxed at her sides, weight balanced. That posture again, something about it nagged at Barrett, but he couldn't place it. "I understand your concerns about security," she replied, maintaining that same calm tone. "But I have authorization to be here." Barrett stopped about 10 feet away from her, his hands resting on his hips. He looked her up and down, taking in the civilian clothes, the casual appearance, the complete absence of any visible credentials. Nothing about her suggested official business or military authorization. "Authorization from who?" he demanded. "Show me your identification and your access papers." The woman tilted her head slightly, and even through the dark sunglasses, Barrett could feel her studying him, measuring him. It was the way a fellow operator looked at you, sizing up capabilities and intentions. But that was impossible. She was just a civilian who'd wandered into the wrong area. "I'd prefer not to at this time," she said carefully. "But I assure you I have every right to be here." That was it. That was the line that pushed Barrett past professional irritation and into genuine anger. In the military, you produced identification when asked. Period. The fact that this woman was refusing to comply with his reasonable request meant she was either lying about her authorization or involved in something that didn't pass the smell test. "Ma'am," he said, his voice taking on a harder edge, "I'm going to ask you one more time to produce identification or leave the area. If you refuse, I'll have to call security to escort you off the premises." The tension was thick enough to cut. 15 recruits stood motionless, sensing that something significant was happening, but not understanding what. Barrett could feel their eyes on him, feel the weight of having an audience for this confrontation. The woman remained maddeningly calm. No nervousness, no fear. Most civilians would have been backing down by now, intimidated by his size, his tone, his obvious authority in this space. But she just stood there, relaxed and centered, as if she had all the time in the world. Barrett pulled out his radio thumb, hovering over the transmit button. He was about to call for backup when something made him pause. Despite the stress of the situation, the woman showed no signs of the anxiety that should have been there. Her breathing was steady. Her hands weren't shaking. Her posture remained balanced and alert. It reminded him of something, someone, the way operators carried themselves after years of training and deployments, that quiet confidence that came from having been tested and not found wanting. But that was impossible. She was wearing jeans and sneakers. Her hair was in a ponytail. She looked like someone's wife, not a military professional. For the first time since the confrontation began, Barrett felt a flicker of uncertainty, but his pride and sense of duty wouldn't allow him to back down. This was his training area. These were his recruits. He had a responsibility to maintain security and discipline, regardless of who this woman might or might not be. "Last warning," he said, keying his radio. "Either show me identification or prepare to be escorted off base." The woman sighed quietly, not dramatically, just a small exhalation that suggested the situation had gone further than she'd intended. She reached toward her back pocket, and for a brief moment Barrett tensed his operator's instincts, screaming at him, even though he wasn't sure why. "Sergeant Stone?" she said, using his rank for the first time. Barrett's eyes narrowed. How did she know his rank? His name tape was visible on his uniform, but his rank insignia wasn't clearly displayed from her position. And even if it were, most civilians wouldn't be able to read military insignia at this distance. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," she continued. But Barrett was past listening. All he could see was a civilian who'd wandered into his training area, refused to follow direct orders, and was now trying to talk her way out of the consequences. He'd been professional. He'd been clear. He'd given her multiple chances to comply, and she'd ignored all of it. The water bottle attached to his tactical vest was half full cold from sitting in the December morning air. Barrett didn't think about what he was going to do next, didn't calculate the consequences, didn't consider that maybe he was making a mistake that would change the trajectory of his entire career. He just acted. In one smooth motion, he unscrewed the cap and hurled the contents directly at the woman's face. The water hit her square on, splashing across her face and soaking through her white t-shirt. She stumbled back slightly from the unexpected assault water dripping from her chin, her sunglasses knocked askew. "Maybe that will cool you down and help you understand that I'm serious," Barrett said, his voice rough with anger and frustration. "This is what happens when civilians think they can waltz into military installations and ignore direct orders from military personnel." The recruits gasped audibly. Seaman Brennan's mouth fell open. Seaman Wyatt Nash took an involuntary step backward. Even the most hardened among them had never witnessed their instructor lose control like this. The woman stood there, water streaming down her face and neck, pooling at her feet. Her white t-shirt clung to her skin, transparent now. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, complete silence fell over the training ground. Everyone waited to see how she would respond. And then she laughed. It started as a quiet chuckle, but quickly grew into genuine amusement. She wiped water from her eyes with the back of her hands, shaking her head in a way that suggested amazement rather than anger. "Well," she said, her voice carrying a hint of irony that sent a chill down Barrett's spine, "that's certainly one way to welcome your new commanding officer." The color drained from Barrett's face. Around him, the recruits started to murmur among themselves, pieces of a puzzle suddenly clicking into place. Barrett felt his stomach drop, felt the ground shift beneath his feet. "What did you just say?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman reached into her back pocket. Of course it was waterproof, of course she'd been prepared, and pulled out a military identification card and a set of official orders. She held them out for Barrett to examine. His hands trembled slightly as he took the documents. The identification card was clear and unmistakable. Captain Karina Vaughn, United States Navy SEALs. The photo showed the same woman who now stood before him, soaked and dripping. Date of birth, March 12, 1972. Current rank 06. Security clearance, top secret SCI. The assignment orders were equally unambiguous. Effective December 15, 2020, Captain Karina Vaughn was to assume command of SEAL Team 7 at Naval Base Coronado, California. The orders bore official seals and signatures from the highest levels of the Pentagon. Admiral Harlan Stockton's signature was right there at the bottom. Barrett felt the blood drain from his face as the magnitude of his mistake crashed over him like a wave. He'd just thrown water on his new commanding officer, humiliated her in front of junior personnel, treated her with utter disrespect. In military terms, what he'd done bordered on insubordination and assault of a superior officer. "Ma'am," he stammered, his earlier confidence evaporating like morning fog. "I had no idea. You weren't in uniform and you didn't identify yourself. I thought you were just a civilian who had wandered into the wrong area." Captain Vaughn took back her identification and carefully returned it to the waterproof holder. She pulled the wet fabric of her t-shirt away from her skin, clearly considering how to handle this delicate situation. Barrett could see it now. All the signs he'd missed. The way she moved. The alertness in her eyes. The confidence that came from years of training in combat. The posture of someone who'd spent 3 decades in uniform. How had he not seen it? How had he been so blind? "Sergeant First Class Barrett Stone," she said formally, using his full rank and name. "I assume you are one of the senior NCOs assigned to my unit?" "Yes, ma'am," Barrett replied, snapping to attention. "Sergeant First Class Barrett Stone, assigned to SEAL Team 7 for the past 8 years. The recruits watched this exchange with fascination and growing concern. They could see their tough-as-nails instructor reduced to a state of barely controlled panic, and they were beginning to understand that they just witnessed something that could have serious consequences for everyone involved. Captain Vaughn walked in a slow circle around Barrett as he stood at attention. Her wet shoes squeaked against the concrete with each step. She was using this time to think, to process, to decide how to proceed. Barrett kept his eyes forward, but he could feel her presence as she moved behind him, beside him, in front of him again. "Tell me, Sergeant Stone," she said as she completed her circle and stood directly in front of him. What do you think should happen to a non-commissioned officer who assaults his commanding officer? Barrett swallowed hard. He knew his career was potentially hanging in the balance. Courts-martial had been convened for far less serious offenses. Assault of a superior officer was one of the most serious charges in the military justice system. Ma'am, according to the Uniform Code of Military Justice, such an action would be grounds for court-martial reduction in rank, possible imprisonment. He replied, his voice steady, despite his obvious distress. Specifically, Article 128, assault of a superior commissioned officer. That's correct, Captain Vaughn confirmed. It would also mean the end of your military career and the loss of all benefits and retirement pay. Is that what you want? No, ma'am, Barrett replied immediately. But I accept full responsibility for my actions, and I'm prepared to face whatever consequences you deem appropriate. Captain Vaughn nodded slowly. Despite his catastrophic mistake, Barrett was showing integrity by accepting responsibility rather than making excuses or trying to shift blame. She turned to address the group of recruits who had been watching the entire exchange with wide eyes. What you have witnessed here today will serve as an important lesson, she announced, her voice carrying easily across the training area. In the military, assumptions can be dangerous. Things are not always what they appear to be, and jumping to conclusions can have serious consequences. She paused to let her words sink in. However, you have also witnessed something equally important. Sergeant Stone acted based on what he believed to be legitimate security concerns. His mistake was not in challenging someone he thought didn't belong here, but in escalating the situation beyond what was necessary and letting his emotions override his judgment. The recruits nodded solemnly, beginning to understand. Captain Vaughn turned back to Barrett. Sergeant Stone, I want you to understand something. I came here today in civilian clothes specifically because I wanted to observe my new unit without the artificial behavior that typically accompanies a change of command. I wanted to see how my people really acted when they thought no one important was watching. Barrett remained silent, understanding beginning to dawn in his eyes. What I saw was a non-commissioned officer who was serious about security, protective of his trainees, and unwilling to back down from what he believed was right. She continued, those are qualities I value in my subordinates, even when they're directed at me inappropriately. Barrett's shoulders relaxed slightly. However, Captain Vaughn added, her voice becoming stern again, your methods were unacceptable. Throwing water on someone, regardless of who they are, is not appropriate military conduct. Do you understand that? Yes, ma'am. Absolutely, Barrett replied without hesitation. Captain Vaughn was quiet for several long moments. The decision would set the tone for her entire command. Every person present would remember this moment for years to come. Sergeant Stone, she began, what you did was wrong, and under normal circumstances it would result in formal disciplinary action. However, I believe that good leaders know when to use discipline as a teaching tool rather than a weapon of destruction. Barrett continued, standing at attention. Here's what's going to happen, she continued. You will personally oversee the training of every new recruit that comes through this unit for the next 6 months. You will teach them about respect, proper military bearing, and the importance of following procedures. Most importantly, you will tell each one of them the story of what happened here today and what you learned from it. Barrett's eyes widened slightly. Rather than being punished, he was being given additional responsibility. Furthermore, Captain Vaughn added, you will serve as my senior enlisted advisor for the first 90 days of my command. I want someone who isn't afraid to speak their mind even when it might be uncomfortable. Your willingness to challenge someone you thought didn't belong here tells me that you have the courage to give me honest feedback when I need it. Barrett felt gratitude and amazement wash over him. Ma'am, I don't know what to say, except thank you for giving me this opportunity to make things right. I promise you won't regret this decision. I'm counting on that, Sergeant, Captain Vaughn replied. But understand this clearly. This is your one free pass. If you ever again let emotion override your judgment, if you ever again treat anyone with the kind of disrespect you showed me today, there will be no second chances. Are we clear on that? Crystal clear, ma'am, Barrett responded immediately. Captain Vaughn turned back to address the recruits one final time. As for all of you, she said, let today serve as a lesson in leadership accountability and second chances. Good leaders don't destroy people for making mistakes. They help them learn from those mistakes and become better operators. She paused to scan the faces of the young men who would soon be serving under her command. However, she continued, her tone becoming more serious, don't mistake compassion for weakness. I expect the highest standards of conduct and performance from every member of this unit. We are Navy SEALs, and that means we represent the very best of the American military. Every action you take, every word you speak, and every decision you make reflects on this team and this uniform. The recruits stood straighter, understanding they were receiving guidance that would shape their entire military careers. The December sun climbed higher in the California sky. In the distance, other training exercises continued, unaware of the drama that had just unfolded. Captain Karina Vaughn looked at the men assembled before her and smiled slightly. Tomorrow would be the official ceremony, the speeches and presentations in military pageantry. But this moment right here was what leadership really looked like. Messy, uncomfortable, human, and absolutely essential. She pulled her wet t-shirt away from her skin one more time and glanced at Barrett Stone, who was still processing what had just happened. Sergeant Stone, she said, I believe you had a training schedule to complete. Yes, ma'am. Right away, ma'am. As Barrett turned back to his recruits as the training day continued, as the base around them returned to its normal rhythms, none of them knew that this moment, this small incident on a December morning, would become the foundation of something much larger. The water would dry, the lesson would endure, and somewhere in the distance, in a place beyond memory and grief, Corporal Jameson Dalton would have smiled. The morning continued as if the world hadn't just shifted on its axis. Captain Karina Vaughn walked over to a bench near the training area and sat down, apparently unconcerned about her damp clothes drying in the December sun. She pulled a small notebook from her waterproof backpack and began making notes, her pen moving steadily across the page. Barrett Stone stood motionless for a moment, still processing what had just happened. He'd gone from thinking his career was over to being given additional responsibilities and the trust of his new commanding officer. The whiplash of emotions left him slightly dizzy. But he was a professional. He'd been given a second chance, and he intended to prove himself worthy of it. All right, listen up, Barrett said, forcing his voice back into instructor mode. What you just saw was a masterclass in leadership under pressure. Captain Vaughn could have ended my career with a single radio call. Instead, she chose to teach. That's the difference between authority and leadership. Remember it. The recruits nodded, more focused now than they'd been all morning. Now we've got 4 more hours of training ahead of us, and we've already lost 30 minutes. Double time for weapons qualifications. Move out. The recruits scrambled to gather their gear and form up. As they jogged toward the firing range, Barrett risked a glance back at Captain Vaughn. She was still writing in her notebook, occasionally looking up to observe the base operations around her. If the water incident had rattled her, she showed no sign of it. The qualification course was standard protocol. Each recruit had to demonstrate proficiency at various distances, prove they could handle malfunctions, and execute combat reloads under time pressure. Barrett supervised range safety, his movements automatic after thousands of hours on firing lines. But his mind kept returning to those words. I trained Jamie in 2013 at Little Creek. Captain Vaughn had known Jamie Dalton, had trained him. The legend from Kuwait, the 19-year-old corpsman who'd run through enemy fire to save a SEAL team, had been Jamie's instructor. The woman Barrett had just assaulted with a water bottle had been the one to forge Jamie into the operator he'd become. The irony was almost unbearable. By noon, the recruits had completed their qualifications. The scores were typical for men at this stage of training. A few standouts, most in the acceptable range, a couple who would need additional work. Barrett was recording the results in his logbook when a voice spoke from directly behind him. What's the base record for this qualification course? Barrett turned to find Captain Vaughn standing close enough that he could see the faint lines at the corners of her eyes, lines earned over years of squinting into the sun in places most people would never see. 96 out of 100, ma'am, he replied. Set by Chief Petty Officer Landon Cross 3 years ago. Captain Vaughn nodded slowly, her gaze drifting to the firing line. Is there time for one more shooter? Barrett blinked, uncertain he'd heard correctly. Ma'am, I'd like to run the qualification course if it won't interfere with your schedule. The recruits had been breaking down their gear, but now they froze, sensing something interesting was about to happen. Barrett felt a flutter of uncertainty. Officers running qualification courses with enlisted personnel wasn't unheard of, but it was unusual. And for the new commanding officer to do it on her first day, still wearing civilian clothes no less, was unprecedented. But he'd just been given a second chance by this woman. If she wanted to shoot, he'd make it happen. Not a problem, ma'am. We can have you set up in 5 minutes. Barrett sent Seaman Nash to retrieve a loaner M4 from the arms room while he prepared the firing line. The recruits had stopped even pretending to break down their gear. They stood in a loose semicircle, watching with undisguised interest. Captain Vaughn accepted the rifle from Nash with a nod of thanks. She checked the chamber, inspected the magazine, tested the action. Her movements were fluid and automatic, the kind that came from having done something thousands of times until it became as natural as breathing. She looked up at Barrett. Standard qualification protocol. Yes, ma'am. 50 rounds at various distances, timed drills, combat reloads required between stages. And your recruits will be watching. I can clear them out if you prefer, ma'am. Captain Vaughn smiled, and for the first time since the water incident, Barrett saw genuine warmth in it. No, let them watch. They should see what good looks like. Barrett called the line hot and started the course. What happened over the next 12 minutes would become legend at Naval Base Coronado. Captain Vaughn moved through the qualification course like water, finding its path downhill. No wasted motion, no hesitation. At 50 yards, she put 5 rounds into a grouping, tight enough to cover with a quarter. At 100 yards, her breathing control was so perfect that Barrett could barely detect the rise and fall of her shoulders between shots. The combat reloads were what really caught his attention. Most shooters, even experienced ones, had a slight pause when changing magazines. A moment where muscle memory competed with conscious thought. Captain Vaughn had no such pause. Her hands moved independently of her conscious mind, dropping empty magazines, seating fresh ones, getting back on target in less than 2 seconds. But Barrett noticed something else, something the recruits couldn't see from their position. At the 300-yard line, Captain Vaughn's hands were shaking, just slightly, just enough that someone who knew what to look for would spot it. She compensated, adjusted her breathing, steadied herself through sheer force of will. But Barrett had seen it, had seen the moment where training and discipline overcame whatever was happening inside her head. When the course ended and the line went cold, Barrett walked down to inspect the targets. He'd been keeping a mental tally as she shot, but seeing the results on paper was different. 98 out of 100, 2 points better than Chief Cross's 3-year-old record. Barrett turned back to where Captain Vaughn stood clearing the rifle. The recruits were silent, stunned into a kind of reverent awe. Even Seaman Rodriguez, who'd been skeptical about female officers since day one of training, looked like he'd just witnessed something that fundamentally challenged his worldview. New base record, ma'am, Barrett announced, his voice carrying across the range. 98 out of 100. Captain Vaughn nodded as if he'd told her the time of day. The 2 I missed were at 300 yards. Wind call was off. She handed the rifle back to Seaman Nash, then turned to address the assembled recruits. Accuracy is important, but you know what's more important. Knowing when not to shoot. The real test of a warrior isn't hitting what you aim at, it's having the judgment to choose your targets wisely. The recruits hung on every word. In the span of one morning, they'd watched their hard-as-nails instructor get humiliated, then pardoned, then witnessed their new commanding officer break a base record while wearing jeans and a t-shirt that was only now finally dry. Barrett cleared his throat. Ma'am, if you're available, we have CQB drills scheduled for 1,400 hours, room clearing and hostage rescue scenarios. Captain Vaughn checked her watch, an old Luminox, the kind SEALs wore because they were functional rather than fashionable. I'll observe, but first I need to change into something more appropriate. Can't run shoot houses in sneakers. She'd come prepared. Of course she had. Somewhere in that small backpack was workout gear because Captain Karina Vaughn didn't do anything halfway. At precisely 1,400 hours, the recruits assembled at the close quarters battle training facility. The shoot house was a modular structure designed to simulate everything from residential homes to office buildings. Rooms could be reconfigured, obstacles added or removed, and scenarios adjusted to create nearly infinite training possibilities. Barrett was briefing the first team when Captain Vaughn emerged from the locker room. She now wore standard PT gear tactical boots, and her hair was pulled back in a tight braid. She looked like she belonged, like she'd been part of Team 7 forever. What followed was a masterclass in close-quarters combat. Captain Vaughn didn't just observe, she participated. She ran through the shoot house as part of a four-man team, moving with the kind of synchronized precision that took most operators years to develop. She flowed through doorways like smoke, her weapon always oriented on the greatest threat, her communication crisp and minimal. The scenario was a hostage rescue. 3 hostile targets, 2 friendly hostages, multiple rooms with limited visibility time limit of 90 seconds from breach to extraction. Captain Vaughn's team completed it in 73 seconds. Perfect target discrimination, 0 hits on hostages, textbook execution from entry to exit. But Barrett saw something the recruits didn't. He saw the moment halfway through the run when Captain Vaughn froze. Just for 2 seconds, her weapon drifted off target, her breathing hitched, and then she snapped back. Muscle memory took over. Training overrode whatever demon had grabbed her in that moment. She was back in the fight, moving, communicating, executing. The team completed the exercise. No one else seemed to have noticed the hesitation, but Barrett had noticed, and he was beginning to understand that Captain Karina Vaughn, for all her skill and experience and legendary status, was fighting battles that had nothing to do with training scenarios and everything to do with ghosts that followed her from places like Kuwait and every other godforsaken corner of the world where she'd proven herself. When Barrett checked the timer and announced the result, several of the recruits actually applauded. It was a breach of protocol, but Barrett let it slide. Sometimes rules mattered less than moments. Chief Petty Officer Landon Cross had been watching from the observation deck. At 41 with 12 years in special operations, Cross was one of the most experienced operators on the base. He was also the man whose shooting record had just been broken. He descended from the observation deck and approached Captain Vaughn as she was removing her safety gear. The recruits went quiet, sensing another significant moment. "Captain Vaughn," Cross said, coming to attention. "Permission to speak freely, ma'am." "Granted, Chief." Cross's weathered face broke into a genuine smile. "That was exceptional shooting today, ma'am. And I've got to say, it's about damn time someone beat my record. I was starting to think it would stand forever." Captain Vaughn extended her hand and Cross shook it firmly. "You set a high standard, Chief. I'm honored to serve with you." "The honor's ours, ma'am." Cross paused, then added, "I don't know if the sergeant told you, but I served with you before. Indirectly. Helmand Province, 2013. You were with Team 3 providing medical support for a convoy extraction. One of those vehicles was carrying my team." Captain Vaughn's expression shifted slightly, memory clearly working. "The ambush at the mountain pass." "Yes, ma'am. Your corpsman team stabilized 4 critically wounded operators under fire. Saved all our lives. I never got a chance to say thank you properly." The observation deck had filled with other operators who'd heard through the base grapevine that something interesting was happening. Petty Officer Quinlan Thorne, the team's primary sniper, stood next to several other veterans. They'd all stopped what they were doing to bear witness to this exchange. "You don't owe me thanks, Chief," Captain Vaughn said quietly. "That's what we do. We bring each other home." But Cross wasn't finished. "Ma'am, there's been some talk. Some of the guys wondering what it would be like having a female CO. Wondering if you earned this command or if it was politics." He turned to address the assembled group, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. "Any man who questions Captain Vaughn's qualifications can come see me personally because I've seen her under fire and I've seen her shoot, and I'm here to tell you that we're damn lucky to have her." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the group. Whatever skepticism might have existed among the veterans of Team 7, it was evaporating in the face of demonstrated competence. Captain Vaughn nodded her acknowledgement, then glanced at her watch. "Gentlemen, I've taken up enough of your training day. Sergeant Stone, carry on with your curriculum. I'll be in the area if you need me." As she walked away, Barrett heard Seaman Nash whisper to another recruit, "Did we just watch the CO break 2 records in one day?" Barrett didn't respond, but he was thinking the same thing. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of standard training. By 1800 hours, the recruits were exhausted, their muscles trembling from the day's exertions. Barrett dismissed them with instructions to report for morning PT at 0530, then began the process of securing equipment and filing reports. He was logging the day's qualification scores when Captain Vaughn appeared beside him again. She had an uncanny ability to move quietly for someone who just spent the day demonstrating lethal competence. "Sergeant Stone, do you have a few minutes? I'd like to speak with you privately." Barrett's stomach tightened reflexively, though he tried to keep his expression neutral. "Of course, ma'am." They walked away from the training areas toward a quiet section of the base where individual equipment storage lockers lined a covered walkway. The December sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The temperature was dropping, carrying the evening chill that always came with coastal California winters. Captain Vaughn leaned against one of the concrete support pillars, her posture relaxed but her eyes alert. "I want you to be completely honest with me about something, Sergeant. What are the biggest challenges facing this unit right now?" Barrett considered the question carefully. His new commanding officer was giving him an opportunity to provide valuable input, and after the morning's disaster, he wanted to make sure his answer was both honest and helpful. "Ma'am, I think our biggest challenge is complacency," he said after a moment. "We've been very successful in recent missions. 18 months without a significant failure. Some of the team members are starting to think we're invincible. That kind of attitude gets people killed in our line of work." Captain Vaughn nodded, encouraging him to continue. "The second problem is integration," Barrett added. "We've got a divide between the veterans who've been here for years and the newer operators who are still proving themselves. Some of the veterans have a tendency to exclude the newer guys from important discussions and decision-making processes. It creates resentment and prevents us from operating as a truly unified team." "Those are both legitimate concerns," Captain Vaughn agreed. "What would you recommend we do about them?" Barrett was surprised by the question. In his experience, most commanding officers wanted to hear about problems, but preferred to develop their own solutions. The fact that Captain Vaughn was asking for his recommendations suggested she genuinely valued his input. "For the complacency issue, I think we need more challenging training scenarios," he suggested. "Maybe some exercises where we're expected to fail occasionally, just to remind everyone that we're not invincible. Nothing breaks down ego faster than a well-designed training evolution that exposes our weaknesses." "And for the integration problem, mixed teams for everything," Barrett replied without hesitation. "No more allowing the veterans to work only with other veterans. Every mission, every training exercise, every project should have a mix of experience levels. Force them to work together until they start trusting each other." Captain Vaughn smiled. "Those are exactly the kinds of recommendations I was hoping to hear. We'll start implementing those changes next week." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the sun sink lower toward the Pacific horizon. Then Captain Vaughn spoke again, her voice quieter, now more personal. "You mentioned earlier that you lost a teammate. Would you mind telling me about it?" Barrett felt his chest tighten. He didn't talk about Jamie often. Most of the time, he kept that pain locked away in a place where it couldn't interfere with his duties. But something about Captain Vaughn's tone, the genuine interest without pity, made him want to answer. "Corporal Jameson Dalton," Barrett said. "We were swim buddies, served together for 3 years. Syria, 2019. We had a CO who'd been promoted too fast. Good man, but not ready for the responsibility. The mission went sideways, and when it mattered most, he froze. And Jamie paid the price." Captain Vaughn finished quietly. "Yes, ma'am. By the time someone else took control of the situation, it was too late. I carried his body out myself, stood at his funeral at Arlington, promised myself I'd never let poor leadership cost another operator their life." Captain Vaughn was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her words carried the weight of shared experience. "I know that Syria mission, Sergeant. I reviewed the entire operation. I read Jamie's service record. What happened to him should never have happened." Barrett turned to look at her directly, genuinely surprised. "You reviewed it?" "I was called in to investigate after the fact. I recommended that Lieutenant Commander Sloan be relieved of command. He had no business being in that position, and I made sure he never commanded operators again." Something shifted in Barrett's chest. All this time, he'd been carrying anger at a system that had failed Jamie. But here was someone who'd actually held that system accountable. Someone who'd made sure it wouldn't happen again. "That's why you're so protective of your training ground," Captain Vaughn continued. "You're not just training recruits. You're trying to make sure no one else becomes another Jamie." Barrett felt his throat tighten. "Yes, ma'am. That's exactly it. I understand that instinct, Sergeant. I share it. But here's what I need you to understand. Protecting people from danger is part of our job, but we can't protect them from everything. Sometimes the best we can do is train them well enough that they can protect themselves. She pushed away from the concrete pillar and turned to face him fully. Tomorrow there's going to be a change of command ceremony, speeches and uniforms and all the formal pageantry that comes with these transitions. But what happened today, what we've talked about tonight, this is the real change of command. This is when we figure out if we can work together. I think we can, ma'am, Barrett said with conviction he genuinely felt. So do I. Captain Vaughn extended her hand. Thank you for your honesty today, Sergeant. Both about the unit's challenges and about your own motivations. That kind of transparency is exactly what I need from my senior enlisted advisor. Barrett shook her hand, feeling the firm grip of someone who'd earned every callus and scar. Thank you for the second chance, ma'am. I won't waste it. As they walked back toward the main base facilities, Barrett found himself thinking about the strange trajectory of this day. It had started with him certain that he was protecting his training ground from an intruder. It was ending with him understanding that he'd found a commanding officer who actually understood what that training ground represented. The base was quieter now, most personnel having secured for the evening. Tomorrow would bring the formal ceremony, the official transfer of authority, the public face of military leadership. But tonight, under a darkening California sky, the real work had already begun. Captain Karina Vaughn had come to observe her new command. What she'd found was a team with exceptional skills but preventable weaknesses. What they'd found in her was a leader who could shoot, who could fight, and most importantly, who understood the difference between authority and respect. And Barrett Stone, who'd started the day as an instructor, protecting his territory, ended it as an advisor helping to shape the future of SEAL Team 7. All because he'd thrown water at the wrong woman, and she'd had the wisdom to turn his mistake into something meaningful. As they parted ways at the administrative building, Barrett couldn't shake the feeling that Team 7 had just gotten very lucky. Not because they'd avoided a disaster, but because they'd found a leader worth following. Tomorrow would be interesting. But then again, in naval special warfare, tomorrow always was. Barrett reached his quarters just after 1900 hours. His phone buzzed immediately. A text from his wife, Sarah. How was the first day with the new CO? Barrett stared at the message for a long moment, trying to figure out how to summarize the most surreal day of his military career. Finally, he typed back a single sentence. I threw water on her face. I'll explain tonight. 3 dots appeared immediately, then disappeared, then appeared again. You what? Barrett smiled despite himself. It was going to be a long explanation. But as he lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, his mind kept returning to Captain Vaughn's words. I trained Jamie in 2013 at Little Creek. The woman he'd assaulted with a water bottle had forged Jamie Dalton into the operator he'd become, had given him the skills that had kept him alive through 2 deployments, had investigated his death and held the system accountable. And now she was here carrying her own ghosts, fighting her own battles, trying to transform Team 7 into something Jamie would have been proud of. Barrett made a decision in the darkness of his quarters. He would protect her the way he hadn't been able to protect Jamie. He would watch for the moments when her ghost caught up with her. He would cover her angles when she needed it, because second chances weren't just about the person receiving them. They were about the person giving them too. And Captain Karina Vaughn had given him something precious. The least he could do was make sure she didn't face her demons alone. Outside, the Pacific crashed against the shore with its eternal rhythm. Across the base in her temporary quarters, Karina Vaughn stood at the window, watching the same ocean. Her dress whites for tomorrow's ceremony hung on the door, pressed and ready. But her mind was still on Barrett Stone's words from earlier that evening. That's why you're so protective of your training ground. You're not just training recruits. You're trying to make sure no one else becomes another Jamie. He'd understood. In one day, this sergeant who'd thrown water at her had seen more clearly than officers she'd worked with for years. He'd seen the weight she carried, the ghosts that followed her, the promise she'd made to every operator she'd ever trained. Tomorrow would be about ceremony and tradition. But today had been about something more important. Today had been about finding an ally in the most unexpected place. She touched the Navy Cross ribbon on her dress whites. Kuwait felt like a lifetime ago. But some lessons never age. Some truths remain constant. Run toward the fire. Trust your training. Bring everyone home. And when you fail, because you will fail, find a way to make that failure mean something. Karina turned from the window and finally allowed herself to sleep. Tomorrow would bring speeches and salutes and the weight of command settling onto her shoulders officially. But tonight she'd taken the first real step toward transforming Team 7 into something that would honor Jamie's memory. The water had dried, but the foundation was set. The morning of December 15th arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that only Southern California could produce in winter. Captain Karina Vaughn stood before the mirror in her temporary quarters, adjusting the collar of her dress white uniform. The fabric was crisp, pressed to regulation perfection. Her ribbons were arranged precisely, each one representing a moment of service, sacrifice, or valor. The Navy Cross sat among them, a reminder of Kuwait and the choices that had brought her to this moment. Her hands moved automatically through the familiar ritual of preparing for a formal military ceremony, but her mind was elsewhere, replaying the events of yesterday, the water hitting her face, Barrett Stone's expression when he realized what he'd done, the moment of decision when she'd chosen mercy over punishment. Leadership wasn't about the ceremonies, it was about moments like those when no cameras were watching and the only witnesses were the people whose lives you'd be responsible for. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. "Ma'am, the car is here." The ceremony was held on the parade ground at precisely 1000 hours. Admiral Harlan Stockton conducted the official proceedings with military precision. Commander James Briggs, the outgoing CO, gave a gracious speech praising the men of Team 7 and expressing confidence in Captain Vaughn's ability to lead them into the future. Then it was Karina's turn. She took the podium and looked out at the assembled faces. Some she recognized from yesterday. Others were new operators who'd been deployed or on leave when she'd arrived. 147 men in dress uniforms standing at attention, waiting to hear what their new commanding officer had to say. "Thank you, Commander Briggs, for your service and your leadership," Karina began. "Yesterday, someone asked me what kind of leader I intend to be. I didn't answer then because I believe that leadership is demonstrated through actions rather than declarations." Several people in Team 7 exchanged glances. They knew she was talking about yesterday. "But I can tell you what I value. I value competence. I value integrity. I value the courage to admit when we're wrong and the wisdom to learn from our mistakes." She paused, letting her words settle. Leadership is earned daily. It's earned in training. It's earned in combat. It's earned in the thousand small decisions we make when we think no one important is watching. My promise to you is simple. I will lead from the front. I will hold myself to the same standards I demand from you, and I will always prioritize bringing every member of this team home alive. The ceremony concluded with the symbolic reading of orders. When it was over, Karina was immediately surrounded by well-wishers. Through it all, she kept one eye on her new team clustered together in a corner, processing and debating their new commanding officer. After 30 minutes, an older man approached. Not in uniform, but moving with the bearing of someone who'd spent decades in service. Karina recognized him immediately from photos in Jamie Dalton's personnel file. Retired Master Chief Thaddeus Merrick, 68 years old, the man who'd trained half the SEALs currently serving on the West Coast. "Captain Vaughn," Merrick said, his voice carrying the rasp of a lifetime of shouted orders. "Permission to speak freely, ma'am." "Granted, Master Chief, and it's good to finally meet you in person." Merrick's weathered face creased into a smile. "I heard about yesterday, the water bottle incident. Word travels fast on this base." "I'm sure it does. I also heard you gave that sergeant a second chance instead of ending his career." Merrick's eyes, still sharp despite his age, studied her carefully. "That took guts. A lot of people would have come down hard just to establish authority. Authority that requires destroying someone to establish isn't worth having, Master Chief. That's why I recommended you for this command." Merrick's words hung in the air like a revelation. "Admiral Stockton asked me 18 months ago who should take over Team 7 when Briggs rotated out. I gave him your name without hesitation." Karina felt something shift in her understanding of how she'd ended up here. "I trained you in '89 at Combat Medic School," Merrick continued. "You were about to wash out after failing the underwater drill. Remember what I told you?" Karina remembered. She'd been 24 hours from quitting, convinced she didn't belong, that she'd never be good enough. "You said, Vaughn, you're not here because you're the strongest or the fastest. You're here because when everyone else freezes, you move. That's worth more than all the physical strength in the world. And I was right. Kuwait proved it. Helmand proved it. Every operation you've been part of for 30 years proved it. Merrick's expression turned serious. But I'm here because I also know you're carrying ghosts. I saw it in your eyes yesterday during that CQB run. You froze for 2 seconds. Most people wouldn't have noticed, but I did. Karina felt exposed in a way she hadn't since she was 19 and covered in blood in Kuwait. I'm fine, Master Chief. No, you're not. And that's okay. Nobody who's done what you've done is fine. But you can't command a team if you're fighting battles in your head that nobody else can see. Merrick stepped closer, lowering his voice. Jamie Dalton's death wasn't your fault. You trained him right. He died because someone else failed him. I know that intellectually, Karina said quietly, but knowing it and believing it are different things. Then let me help you believe it. I'm retired, which means I've got nothing but time, and you're going to need someone in your corner who understands what you're dealing with. Merrick pulled out a card with a phone number. Call me when the ghosts get loud. Day or night. That's what old instructors are for. Karina took the card, feeling something loosen in her chest. Thank you, Master Chief. Call me Tad. I'm too old for formalities. He glanced around at the dispersing crowd. Now go be the leader these men need. And remember, you don't have to be perfect. You just have to be present. As Merrick walked away, Karina felt a wave of gratitude. She'd been so focused on proving herself, on being strong enough to handle everything alone, that she'd forgotten the value of having someone who understood. The next week brought immediate changes to Team 7. Karina implemented the recommendations she and Barrett had discussed. Mixed teams for all training exercises. Challenging scenarios designed to expose weaknesses rather than confirm strengths. The resistance came faster than expected. On Monday morning, Karina assembled the entire team for a briefing. 147 operators filled the room, veterans and newer team members, all curious about what their new CO had planned. Gentlemen, Karina began, starting today, we're implementing a new training protocol. All exercises will be conducted with integrated teams. Veterans will be paired with operators who have less than 2 years with the unit. No exceptions. The room remained silent, but Karina could read the body language. Several of the senior operators exchanged glances. Chief Landon Cross looked thoughtful but neutral. Lieutenant Commander Preston Gage, 51 Desert Storm veteran, old school to his core, crossed his arms. Ma'am, Gage said, raising his hand, with respect, we've developed working relationships with our regular teammates. We know how each other moves, thinks, reacts. Splitting us up could actually decrease our effectiveness. It was a reasonable objection, delivered professionally. Karina had expected this. I understand your concern, Commander Gage, she replied, and you're right that established relationships are valuable. But answer me this. What happens when one of your regular teammates goes down? What happens when you're forced to operate with someone you've never trained with because that's who's available? Gage didn't have an immediate answer. Integration isn't about destroying what works, Karina continued. It's about making sure everyone can work with everyone. That's how you build a truly resilient team. The first integrated training exercise was scheduled for Wednesday. The scenario was a nighttime hostage rescue in an urban environment. 4 teams of 4 operators each. Each team had 2 veterans and 2 newer operators. Barrett supervised as team leader, with Karina observing from the Tactical Operations Center. It was a disaster. Team Alpha, led by Chief Cross, completed the objective, but took 47 minutes. The standard was 30. Team Bravo, with Petty Officer Quinlan Thorne as the senior operator, had a simulated friendly fire incident when communication broke down between the veteran sniper and his younger spotter, Wyatt Nash. Team Charlie never made it past the initial breach because the veterans and newer operators couldn't agree on the entry method. Only Team Delta, led by the team medic, completed the exercise within acceptable parameters, and even they had struggled. After the exercise, Karina called everyone together. The operators looked frustrated, embarrassed, angry. They just failed at something they should have been able to do in their sleep. That, Karina said, letting the silence stretch, was unacceptable. The operators shifted uncomfortably. But it was also exactly what I expected. You've all gotten comfortable operating with the same people, using the same methods, falling into the same patterns. And those patterns just got exposed. The question now is what you're going to do about it. Chief Cross raised his hand. Ma'am, we need more practice with these integrated teams. We can't expect to function as a unit after one training session. Agreed, Karina said, which is why we're running this scenario again tomorrow night, and the night after that, and every night until you can execute it flawlessly. A collective groan went through the room, quickly stifled. Welcome to the new Team 7, gentlemen. We're going to get comfortable being uncomfortable. Any questions? There were none, at least not out loud. Over the next 2 weeks, something remarkable began to happen. The integrated teams that had struggled initially began to gel. Veterans learned to trust the fresh perspectives of newer operators. Younger team members absorbed the hard-won wisdom of those with more experience. But on the morning of week 3, Barrett knocked on Karina's office door. Ma'am, we have a situation. Lieutenant Commander Preston Gage had called an informal meeting with 12 senior operators. Without Karina's knowledge or approval, the meeting was happening right now in one of the briefing rooms. Karina felt her jaw tighten. Show me. They found the meeting in progress. Gage was standing at the front of the room, speaking in low tones to the assembled veterans. The conversation stopped the instant Karina and Barrett entered. Commander Gage, Karina said, her voice calm but carrying an edge. I don't recall authorizing this meeting. Gage had the grace to look uncomfortable. Ma'am, we were just discussing some concerns about the new training protocols. Concerns that couldn't be brought to me directly? The room was silent. The 12 operators present all veterans with years of experience watch this confrontation with the intensity of men who understood that what happened next would define the command climate for months to come. With respect, Captain Gage said, some of us feel that the integrated team approach is making us weaker, not stronger. We're experimenting with combat effectiveness, and that concerns us. Experimenting, Karina repeated. That's an interesting word, Commander. Tell me, what do you think we should do instead? Keep operating the same way we always have and hope that somehow produces different results. Ma'am, what we've been doing has worked. 18 months without a significant operational failure. That's not luck, that's solid teamwork and proven methods. Karina took a step forward. You're right. What you've been doing has worked until it doesn't. Until someone gets injured because coordination breaks down. Until someone dies because the team can't adapt when the situation changes. She paused, letting that sink in. 3 weeks ago, we had a live fire incident. Seaman Tucker Brennan dislocated his shoulder because of a coordination failure between his team members. He's in physical therapy right now, and there's a chance he'll never operate again. That happened under the old system, Commander. The system you're defending. Gage opened his mouth to respond, but Karina wasn't finished. I take full responsibility for that incident. I pushed too hard too fast and someone got hurt because of it. But you know what I'm not going to do? I'm not going to stop pushing just because it's uncomfortable. Because comfortable gets people killed in our line of work. The room was absolutely silent now. Here's what's going to happen, Karina said, addressing the entire group. Anyone who can't support this new training approach is free to request a transfer. I will approve it immediately with no prejudice to your record. But if you stay, you're all in. No more informal meetings. No more working around me. If you have concerns, you bring them to me directly. Are we clear? Nods around the room, some reluctant, others more convinced. Commander Gage, Karina said, turning back to him, do you want to request a transfer? Gage met her eyes. For a long moment, the outcome hung in the balance. No, ma'am, he finally said. I'll stay, and I'll support the program. Good, because I need experienced operators like you helping to make this work, not fighting against it. Karina's tone softened slightly. Your concerns about combat effectiveness are valid, but trust me when I say that adaptability is combat effectiveness. You'll see that in time. The meeting dispersed. As the operators filed out, Barrett caught Karina's eye. A silent question, are you okay? She nodded, but the truth was her hands were shaking. Not from fear or anger, but from the weight of what she'd just done. She'd confronted senior leadership, drawn a line in the sand, and gambled that they would respect her enough to stay. If it had gone differently, she could have lost half her experienced operators in one morning. That night, Karina couldn't sleep. She lay in her quarters staring at the ceiling, replaying the confrontation with Gage over and over. Had she been too harsh, too lenient? Had she handled it right? Her phone buzzed at 0200 hours. A text from an unknown number. Captain, this is Master Chief Merrick. I heard about today. You did good. Get some sleep. Tomorrow brings another chance to lead. Karina smiled despite herself. The old instructor network on military bases was faster than any official communication system. She typed back a simple response. Thank you, Tad. His reply came immediately. That's what old instructors are for. Now sleep. That's an order. Karina set her phone down and closed her eyes. The ghosts were still there. Kuwait Jamie every mistake she'd ever made. But they were quieter now. Manageable. She slept. The breakthrough came during week 5. A vehicle interdiction drill. Team Bravo, Quinlan Thorne, and Wyatt Nash. The sniper and spotter who'd had the simulated friendly fire incident in week 1. The scenario called for stopping a vehicle convoy, extracting a high-value target from the middle vehicle, and exfiltrating before enemy reinforcements arrived. Time limit 20 minutes. Karina watched from the TOC as Team Bravo approached the target. Thorne was in overwatch position on a rooftop providing security. Nash was with the assault element on the ground. The convoy appeared. The assault team moved to intercept. But as they approached, Nash spotted something that didn't match the intelligence brief, a 4th vehicle not included in the scenario parameters. Viper 2, this is Viper ground, Nash radioed to Thorne. I've got eyes on an unknown vehicle 50 meters east of target 2, requesting guidance. Thorne had 2 choices. Stick to the plan, which called for engaging only pre-designated targets, or trust his younger teammates' instincts and adapt. Through his scope, Thorne could see that the unknown vehicle contained additional hostile role players. It was an ambush element added by the scenario designers to test adaptability. Viper ground, this is Viper 2. Unknown as hostile. Recommend abort current approach and flank from the north. It was the right call, and it came from trusting a younger operator's observation and adapting the plan in real time. Team Bravo completed the exercise in 18 minutes with perfect execution. After the debrief, Karina approached Thorne privately. That was good work out there, petty officer. You trusted your teammate and adapted when it mattered. Thorne nodded slowly. I'll be honest, ma'am. I didn't want these integrated teams. Thought it was unnecessary. But Nash saved our asses today. Kids got good instincts, and I wouldn't have seen them if you hadn't forced us to work together. It was the validation Karina had been waiting for. That evening, after the successful vehicle interdiction drill, Lieutenant Commander Preston Gage approached Karina in the TOC. Ma'am, permission to speak freely. Karina looked up from her reports. Granted, Commander. I owe you an apology. When I called that meeting 3 weeks ago, I was wrong. Not just about the procedure, about the principle. Gage's weathered face showed genuine contrition. I watched Nash and Thorne today. That kid spotted something a 36-year-old veteran missed, and Thorne trusted him because they'd been forced to work together. Apology accepted, Commander. And for what it's worth, your concerns were valid. Integration does create short-term friction. You were right to raise them, just wrong about the forum. Understood, ma'am. I should have come to you directly. Gage paused. I'm Desert Storm Generation. Watched the military change in ways I didn't always understand. Took me too long to realize that change isn't the enemy. Stagnation is. After Gage left, Tad Merrick, who'd been observing from the corner, chuckled quietly. You just converted your biggest skeptic. That's good leadership, Captain. No, Karina corrected. That's what happens when you give people room to change their minds without humiliating them. Gage is a good officer. He just needed to see the results for himself. Jamie would have said the same thing. Merrick stood to leave. You're building something that'll outlast all of us. Keep going. In early February, Team 7 received deployment orders. Advisory mission to an unnamed location in Yemen. They would train local security forces in counterterrorism tactics. No direct combat role, but high-pressure diplomacy and the kind of patient instruction that required different skills than kicking down doors. Barrett would lead the ground element of 12 operators. Karina would coordinate with host nation leadership and manage the strategic aspects of the mission. The mission lasted 6 weeks. During that time, Team 7 trained over 200 local security personnel in everything from basic marksmanship to complex raid planning. The work was tedious, often frustrating, and required exactly the kind of integration that Karina had been building. Veterans like Thorne and Cross had the experience to understand tactical principles at a deep level. But the younger operators, many of whom were closer in age to the local security forces, had an easier time building rapport and communicating effectively. In week 4, Team 7 was conducting a live fire training exercise with local forces when one of the local trainees, a 22-year-old named Karim al-Rashid, made a critical error with his weapon. The situation could have resulted in serious injury. Wyatt Nash, supervising that particular firing line, immediately recognized the error, physically intervened to correct the weapon handling, and then spent 20 minutes working one-on-one with Karim to ensure he understood what had gone wrong and why. It was exactly the kind of patient, ego-free instruction that built trust and competence. That evening, the local security force commander approached Karina with genuine gratitude. "Your young sergeant," he said, referring to Nash. "He saved my man's life today, and he did it without embarrassing him in front of his peers. That takes wisdom beyond his years." But on the morning of February 23rd, everything changed. Karim al-Rashid had been kidnapped. The intel was fragmentary but dire. An AQAP cell operating in the mountains north of their position had taken Karim during a supply run. They had 36 hours before an execution video would be released, a propaganda tool to demonstrate the cost of cooperating with American forces. The Pentagon directive was clear and unequivocal. Advisory capacity only. Do not conduct unilateral operations. Karina stood in the Tactical Operations Center, staring at satellite imagery of the compound where Karim was being held. 18 hostile fighters estimated. Mountainous terrain, limited exfiltration options. Her phone rang. Admiral Stockton. "Captain Vaughn, I'm sure you've seen the intelligence on the kidnapped local national." "Yes, sir. We're developing contingency plans." "There will be no contingency plans. Your orders are to stand down. This is a host nation problem. Let them handle it." Karina felt something cold settle in her chest. "Sir, that young man was taken because he was working with us. He's our responsibility." "Captain, I understand your position, but you need to understand mine. The program putting female officers in SEAL command positions is under intense scrutiny. One mistake, one violation of orders, and it's over. Not just for you, for every woman who comes after you." "Sir, that's not a request, Captain. That's an order. Stand down." The line went dead. Karina stood there, phone in hand, feeling the weight of impossible choices crushing down on her. Barrett entered the talk. "Ma'am, we've got a viable rescue plan. 8-man team, 90-minute window. We can get him out." "The Pentagon says no." "With respect, ma'am, the Pentagon isn't here. They don't know these people. They didn't train Karim. They won't have to watch that execution video." Karina looked at the satellite imagery again, saw Karim's face in her mind, saw Jamie Dalton's face, saw every operator she'd ever trained, ever fought alongside, ever failed. Her phone buzzed, a text from Tad Merrick, who somehow always knew when she needed to hear from him. "In 1991, you ran toward the fire when everyone else froze. That's who you are. Don't forget it now." Karina made her decision. "Barrett, assemble your team. We launch in 60 minutes. Ma'am, if we do this, I know what we're risking, but some orders are wrong. If they relieve me, so be it. But Karim comes home." The rescue operation launched at 0200 hours local time. 8 operators, Barrett, Nash, Thorne, and 5 others, including 2 Yemeni liaison officers who'd volunteered despite the risk to their own careers. The target compound was in the mountains, accessible only by foot after the helicopters dropped them 3 kilometers out. Karina coordinated from the TOS, watching thermal imagery and listening to radio traffic, feeling every second stretch into eternity. The breach went wrong immediately. The primary entry point was rigged with an IED, not in the intelligence, not anticipated, and now blocking their fastest route in. Barrett's voice crackled over the radio. "Viper base, this is Viper 1. Primary entry compromised. Going loud will alert hostiles to our position. Going quiet means 20-minute delay. Intelligence suggests execution may be imminent." Karina stared at the screen, seeing Kuwait in her mind. The impossible choices. The knowledge that perfect wasn't possible, only fast. "Blow the door. Get our people out." "Roger, ma'am. Trusting your call." The breaching charge detonated. The team rushed in. Gunfire erupted, short, controlled bursts from the SEAL team, wild automatic fire from the AQAP fighters. 6 hostiles down in the first 30 seconds. Karim located in a back room, alive but wounded. Gunshot to the leg survivable if they moved fast. But the exfiltration was a nightmare. More hostiles converging on the position. The helicopter 8 minutes out. Thorne reporting they couldn't hold the perimeter that long. And then Kareem, barely conscious, did something extraordinary. He grabbed Nash's radio and, speaking in rapid Arabic, called the local security forces he'd been training with for 4 weeks. 50 Yemeni soldiers men he'd trained alongside men who trusted him, mobilized immediately and raced toward the compound. They arrived in time to establish a defensive perimeter that held off the ACAP reinforcements long enough for the extraction helicopter to land. 0 friendly KIA, 1 friendly WIA Kareem with a survivable injury. As the helicopter lifted off, Nash looked at Kareem, whose eyes were starting to glaze from blood loss and morphine. "You saved us," Nash said. Kareem smiled weakly. "You taught me. Never abandon your team. Now I save yours." The integration training had worked, not just for Team 7, but for the local forces they'd been teaching. Trust created capability. Capability saved lives. 3 weeks later, Karina stood in a Pentagon briefing room facing Secretary of Defense Conrad Hartwick. "Captain Vaughn, you violated direct orders from a flag officer." "Yes, Mr. Secretary, I did." "And if ordered again to stand down in a similar situation, what would you do?" Karina met his eyes without flinching. "Sir, if the order means leaving an operator American or allied to die for political convenience, I would violate it again." Every single time. The room was silent. Admiral Stockton sat to the side, his expression unreadable. Secretary Hartwick leaned back in his chair. The president watched the footage of the Kareem rescue operation. "Your methods are now JSOC doctrine for advisory missions. Integrated training, cultural sensitivity, building trust with host nation, forces all of it." He stood up. "You're being promoted to commander. You'll oversee the implementation of this integrated training approach across all SEAL teams on the West Coast." Admiral Stockton stood and saluted. "You didn't just save Kareem Karina. You proved something that needed proving." Karina returned the salute. "With respect, sirs, I didn't prove anything about gender. I proved that leaders lead. The rest is just noise." 2 months later, on a spring morning at Naval Base Coronado, Karina pinned Master Chief anchors onto Barrett Stone's uniform. His wife Sarah stood beside him, tears streaming down her face. Their 2 children watched with pride. "Master Chief Stone," Karina said formally, "you've earned this through years of exceptional service and a demonstrated ability to grow as a leader. Congratulations." Barrett's voice was thick with emotion. "Thank you, ma'am. 5 months ago, I threw water at you. Today, I'm standing here because you believe second chances define us more than first mistakes. For Jamie Dalton, for every operator you'll train, for showing us what real leadership looks like." Tad Merrick watched from the front row, his weathered face creased in a smile. The ceremony concluded with a reception on the parade ground. Operators mingled with family members, their dress whites crisp in the spring sunshine. Children chased each other between groups of adults, their laughter a reminder of what these men fought to protect. Barrett found Karina near the edge of the gathering, watching the scene with quiet satisfaction. "Penny for your thoughts, ma'am?" he asked. "Just thinking about how far we've come, Master Chief. 6 months ago, you threw water at me. Today, you're leading the next generation of SEAL training." She smiled. "Jamie would have loved this. He always said the measure of a leader was who they created, not what they accomplished." Barrett nodded. "He used to quote you all the time in training. Captain V says courage has a brain. We thought he was making it up. I probably stole it from Tad Merrick, who stole it from someone else. Good lessons get passed down." Karina glanced at Sarah Stone, who was taking photos of their children with Barrett's new Master Chief anchors. "You've got a good family, Barrett. Don't forget to go home to them." "Yes, ma'am, and Captain, thank you for everything." After he left, Tad Merrick appeared at Karina's elbow as if summoned. "You did good, Captain. That young man is going to train the next 1,000 SEALs, and they'll all hear the story about the water bottle and the CO who chose mercy over punishment." "That's not the story I want them to remember, Tad." "I know, you want them to remember the integration training, the combat effectiveness, the mission saved. But stories need hooks, and that water bottle is one hell of a hook." Merrick's eyes twinkled. "Besides, the best stories contain multiple truths. Let them remember the water. as long as they also remember what came after. Karina raised her coffee cup in a mock toast. To water bottles and second chances. And to the leaders wise enough to know the difference between discipline and destruction, Merrick added. The sun climbed higher over Coronado. In the distance, recruits were already gathering for afternoon training. The work never stopped. The mission never ended. But for one morning, Team 7 paused to celebrate transformation. Not just of one sergeant who'd made a mistake, but of an entire unit that had learned to trust across generations and experience levels. The water had dried months ago. The lessons were just beginning to take root. 5 years passed. 5 years of successful missions of lives saved of younger operators trained and developed. 5 years of building Team 7 into something that would outlast any single commander. In December 2025, Rear Admiral Karina Vaughn stood on a stage at the Naval Special Warfare Center watching 47 newly minted SEALs receive their tridents. At 53, she commanded all West Coast SEAL operations, the youngest female to reach that rank in the history of the Navy. Master Chief Barrett Stone, now 39, and head of Advanced SEAL Training, stood beside her. Tad Merrick, 78 now, and still teaching, despite his age, sat in the front row. Barrett addressed the graduating class. Before you leave here today, I'm going to tell you a story. It's about the day I threw water on my commanding officer. He told it well, having refined the telling over 5 years and hundreds of classes, but the lesson never changed. I expected to be court-martialed. Instead, Admiral Vaughn taught me the most important lesson of my military career. That leaders who lift others up are stronger than leaders who crush them. That mercy and accountability can coexist. That second chances aren't signs of weakness, they're proof of wisdom. After the ceremony, Karina, Barrett, and Tad walked along the beach at Coronado. The December sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. You know what they call you now, Tad said. The Corpsman Admiral. The one who proved that healing and fighting aren't opposites. They're two sides of the same mission. Karina smiled. I've been called worse. Barrett pulled out a canteen, grinning mischievously. For old time's sake, Admiral. Karina laughed. Master Chief, I outrank you now. Court-martial would stick this time. Tad chuckled. Kid, don't test her. She's got the president on speed dial now. They tapped their canteens together in the fading light. To Jamie, Barrett said. To second chances, Karina added. To everyone who runs toward the fire. Tad finished. Behind them, 300 SEALs gathered for the traditional group photo. Karina stood in the center, flanked by Barrett, and Tad surrounded by the men she'd trained, led, and transformed. The camera clicked. The moment frozen forever. The water had dried years ago. But the lesson endured, spreading through every SEAL team, every training class, every operator who heard the story and understood that leadership wasn't about perfection. It was about presence, about courage, about the wisdom to know when mercy was stronger than punishment. In classrooms across naval special warfare, instructors would tell the story of the water incident for decades to come. Not as a cautionary tale about discipline, but as an example of transformational leadership. And somewhere in the vast machinery of military memory, Corporal Jameson Dalton's legacy lived on. Not in the manner of his death, but in the way his loss had forged two leaders who understood that the best way to honor the fallen was to make sure their sacrifice meant something. The sun set over the Pacific. The waves rolled eternal against the shore, and the lesson remained as clear as the water that had started it all. Second chances define us more than first mistakes. Leadership is earned through wisdom, not authority, and the measure of a warrior isn't in never falling, it's in how they choose to rise.